Good morning, everybody. Good morning and welcome to the 13th anniversary of the National Apology for Forced Adoptions. I'm your MC, Jo Sparrow, President of Jigsaw Queensland. I'm an adopted person who was born in 1971, just up the hill at the Royal Brisbane, and I was taken from my mother without ever seeing or touching her. I stayed there for 3 weeks before I was adopted by a family on the Darling Downs who had 3 existing biological children. And over the years, I've experienced all the highs and lows that come with reunion and the challenges that sometimes come with adoptive families as well. Firstly, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this event is taking place, the Turrbal and Yuggera people. We pay our respects to elders, past and present and emerging. And we acknowledge how much we have to learn from them and their unique understanding of connection and adoption, and their recognition that at the base of every change is truth-telling and healing. We'd also like to acknowledge and thank all of the people who have advocated over the many years for the reality and impacts of forced adoption to be revealed. The ones who contributed so much to supporting those affected and who through their efforts gained a national apology for forced adoptions. Without you, this day would not be happening. And thank you to the Australian Government, Department of Social Services for funding this event. Today we welcome some very important people. The Honourable Amanda Cam, MP, Minister for Families, Seniors, Disability Services and Minister for Child Safety and Prevention of Domestic and Family Violence. Corinne McMillan, Member for Mansfield and Shadow Minister for Child Safety, Community and Prevention of Domestic and Family Violence. Grace Grace, Member for McConnell. Joe Kelly, Member for Greenslopes. Di Riddell, who is representing Chris Whiting, Member for Bancroft. Hope Peasley, Deputy Director General of the Queensland Department of Families. And Dr. Trevor Jordan, Past President and CEO of Jigsaw Queensland. Also, thank you to Kerry Saint and Judy Glover from Association of Adoptees, Vivian Timmermans from You Gave Me a Voice, Trish Schlarge and Rhonda Grant from Alas Australia, Leslie Mitchell and Jane Sleeker from Sunshine Coast Adoption Support and Jigsaw Queensland team for planning the event today. I'd now like to invite Kerry Saint from Association of Adoptees to speak as we light a candle and observe a minute's silence to acknowledge and remember those in our community who are no longer with us.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to those that have arranged today. Thank you. It's always an honour to come and speak at these events. I'm also an adoptee affected by forced adoption. I grew up with a lot of abuse in my adoptive family, and by all intents and purposes, my life should not be here today by what I've endured. So I acknowledge that there are many people whose journeys have been exceptionally difficult, and that the light in their own heart has almost gone out. And we know that we have lost adopted people this year. We know that we have lost mothers this year. We know that we have mothers fighting cancer through stilobistrol and are fighting for their life right now as we speak. Some of those people are very close to me. I've been working in this space as an advocate since 1982, so the journey has been exceptionally hard. Watching and seeing people whose lives are lost that never heard an apology, never heard any recognition for what they endured. The truth was never revealed to them, and they died with the lies encased in their coffin. So I'd like to say that let's please remember those people today that are not here with us to join us in the healing process and understanding that society got it wrong. I want to share a brief story before I just go a bit further in the healing process, because I was asked to turn this light on. This light is representative of all the lives, but also those who have tried to shed a light about forced adoption and the impact that it has. And I want to share that each of us are broken in our own way, and we often think, is our life worth anything? I know many times I didn't feel I had the right to breathe the same air as everyone else. So I want to share the story of two pails where an old gentleman didn't have any electricity on in his house, so let's talk about a light. And he would walk down to the creek every day with two pails. One of those pails or buckets was brand new, shiny new. Another one was a bit rusty and had a few holes in it. And he'd walk down to the creek every morning and he'd get his water for the day. And every day he'd get back up to the house and the pail that was a bit rusty and holes in it had virtually very little water in it. And he would curse the bucket because it made his day harder. Eventually, over weeks and weeks, he'd continue to go down to the river and grab the water until one morning he gets up and he realises on his path down to the water, one side is completely dry. There's just weeds. On the other side, there are flowers growing, all sorts of array of flowers. And in those flowers is life. There's butterflies and there's bees. And he looks at his bucket in a whole new way. And that's how we need to look at ourselves through our journey of forced adoption and the many traumas we've had to endure. We have the opportunity to share with each other and lift each other up and share the light of what we've endured. And when we look back on our lives, because many of us are quite senior, we can look back and know that we planted a garden in the process of our trauma. So I'd like to light this light today in remembrance of those to which we've lost, those to which who are still journeying, those to which have yet to have the light turned on for them because they're still in the fog. And I want to thank you here for being here today and being brave enough to turn the light on in your journey. So we just have a moment's silence. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Kerry. Today our theme is healing. In my time working with Jigsaw Queensland since 2015, my 5 years as president and 6 seasons of producing the Adopt Perspective podcast and many years of attending and facilitating peer support groups, I've had the great privilege of listening to countless stories from people who are impacted by adoption. Stories from mothers and fathers who lost children, from adopted people searching for identity and connection, siblings, partners, and families who've all lived with the ripple effects of family separation and adoption. When you listen enough to these stories, you notice something. Healing does not look the same for everyone, and it isn't any one thing that provides a magic band-aid. For some people, healing begins with finding answers, searching for records, names, and histories that were hidden from them. For others, reunion is a step on the path. For some, it's about advocacy and speaking truth about what happened to them. And for others, it is about quiet personal work, therapy, writing, building relationships, moving their bodies, ritual, or simply finding ways to live with the complexity of their story. There is no single path. Another thing I've learned is that healing is rarely a destination. It is more a lifelong process, something that unfolds over time, sometimes slowly, sometimes in unexpected ways. And perhaps most importantly, I've learned that healing often begins with a choice to be curious about our stories, a choice to seek understanding, a choice to keep moving forward when the past cannot be changed. But healing is rarely something that people do alone. It is supported by communities who listen, who bear witness, who believe people's stories, and who create spaces where these stories can be told safely. Today we'll hear from 6 speakers, each sharing what healing means in their own lives. Their experiences will be different because healing is different for everyone. But together their stories remind us that while the history of forced adoptions brought profound loss, people continue to find ways to reclaim their lives and identities. And for those here who love or support someone affected by adoption or work in this space, Perhaps the most powerful thing that you can offer is very simple: to listen, to believe, and to genuinely walk alongside them in whatever healing looks like for them. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Di Riddell.
Thank you, Jo. From silence to voice. It was a Tuesday she agreed to meet me. Wednesday, our details were exchanged. Thursday, the letters arrived. Friday, we spoke. And after 50 years on the Saturday, she walked into my arms. That moment didn't begin on that Saturday. It began in the 1960s. You see, in the 1960s, I was coerced into giving up 2 babies for adoption. In that era, young women were told to forget, to smile, to move on as though nothing sacred had been torn from them. But a mother does not forget. Her arms may be empty, but her heart never is. The world had moved forward, but part of me stood still, holding 2 invisible hands. Healing isn't always pretty. It's messy, uncomfortable, but it's worth every second. Today, I live an extraordinary life, but it wasn't always like that. As I share something precious today, my heart, you will understand the depth of my adoption journey and the healing that followed. There came a time in my life when I was looking both forward and back and asking myself a difficult question: am I in the right place in my life? The honest answer was no. So I made a choice. I chose to bring my past into the light, to share my story, to let my voice rise. And I did that with presence, energy, and quiet confidence. I was learning to show up differently in the world. Was it easy? No. My healing journey had more bends, curves, and dips than any self-respecting mountain range. But what I discovered along the way is priceless. As a frightened pregnant teenager, I was told I was a disgrace to myself, the universe, and everything in between. No decent man would ever want me. I should go nursing, get out of society's way, and give something back. I tried to prove my worth by being efficient, capable, and strong. But then something wonderful happened. I met and married a beautiful man. He was the first man who truly respected me. He knew about my past, but he could see past those labels that I had been stuck with. We shared a wonderful 31-year marriage and raised a family together. During that time, I joined Toastmasters, where I began to learn the skills of confidence, communication, and leadership. Skills that would become terribly important later on in life. But when Les passed away in 2002, my life fell apart. And grief has a way of bringing buried things to the surface. Suddenly the past that I had tried to manage for decades stood right in front of me. I felt confusion, anger, sadness, and overwhelm. But that was when the true journey of healing began. There were 3 things that changed my life. First was delving deeply into self-development. Secondly was learning the art of forgiveness. And third, expressing and practicing gratitude. Through speaking and writing, I discovered something powerful in me: courage and resilience. Eventually, I wrote my first book, Beyond Abuse, followed later by Speak Out, From Suppression to Expression, which is a book about finding your voice. Then something truly remarkable happened. The day the updated version of Beyond Abuse was released, a thought flashed wildly in my mind. You are ready to search. At first I was stunned, then excited beyond measure. With the help of Post-Adoption Support Queensland, the search began. I prayed, not for myself, but for my children, for their safety, their peace, and their freedom to make whatever decision felt right for them. One day, that message arrived. They'd found my son, and they had found my daughter. When my daughter was traced, everything moved with lightning speed. Tuesday, she agreed to meet me. Wednesday, our details were exchanged. Thursday, the letters arrived. Friday, we spoke. And Saturday, she walked into my arms like she had already known the way. We laughed about little things, like how we both loved giraffes and hate bananas. There were tiny threads of sameness that felt like a miracle that just went through the conversation. Then later, when I met my son, after more than 55 years, we hugged and we looked into each other's eyes, searching, not for a recognition of face, but something much deeper, more cellular, something that had never stopped knowing. And we found it. For many years, I carried that love in silence, love without photographs, love without birthdays, without the right to say their names out loud. But I know my story is not the only one. After sharing my story publicly, something else unexpected happened. I was interviewed on the Jigsaw podcast by the lovely Jo. 2 years later, I received a message from a man in the Netherlands who had been listening. He too had been adopted. As he listened to my story, something happened. I had spoken about being sent away as a terrified teenager to work in a doctor's home as a housemaid in the western suburbs of Brisbane. But trauma and time had erased the details. The name, the place, they were lost to me. And I had never expected to find them again. But as he listened, my voice seemed familiar to him, familiar enough to ask the question that travelled across countries to his own birth mother who lives in England. And suddenly, pieces began to fall into place. Names, memories, and details of a time in my life that I thought was long lost. Through a connection that I could never have planned, I was given back a missing part of my story. A deeper layer of healing began that I didn't know I needed. It reminded me of something profound. When we find the courage to speak, our story does not just belong to us. It reaches further, it connects wider, and sometimes finds its way back to us in unexpected ways. In this room, I've got the shakes, and far beyond it, there are others still carrying their own silent stories, still searching, still waiting, still wondering if healing is possible. And if my journey has taught me anything, it is this: healing is possible. Not because the past changes, but because we do. Today, there are no empty spaces in my heart. There is my son, there is my daughter, and there is peace. For years, I carried love in silence. Today, I carry it in my voice, and that is healing.
Di. That was incredible. And it certainly crosses some of the themes that we spoke about on the podcast and that I've heard so many times about connection, finding your voice, and speaking your truth. And just that connection in the Netherlands is like just uncanny. It's amazing how many people you touch. But thank you very much for speaking and being first up too. Thank you.
Thank you, audience.
I'd now like to welcome Elizabeth English to the lectern.
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth English and I'm an adoptee. I'm honoured to be here today on the 13th anniversary commemoration for forced adoptions and have the opportunity to share my story and my healing odyssey with you all. I was born at the Mater Hospital, North Sydney, New South Wales in late 1961, and I was immediately taken from my mother, and 4 weeks later I was adopted by a married couple from Bondi. They had already adopted a baby boy 18 months prior from the same hospital. He subsequently became my older brother, and they became my parents, just like that. As many of us here understand, adoption is complex. Our stories are layered with loss, identity, discovery, and sometimes reconnection. Healing is not linear. For me, it has been an odyssey because it hasn't been a straight path from the beginning to the end. It's been a returning, a revisiting of the same questions, identity, belonging, worth, but each time from a different place within myself. It has required endurance and courage and a willingness to face parts of my story I once avoided. And like any odyssey, it has changed me, not just in what I know, but in who I have become. For some adoptees like myself, the mere mention of the word adoption can trigger feelings that can be so overwhelming and emotionally destabilising, subsequently reopening dormant wounds that lay simmering deep down within. These days, I prefer to call my adoption narrative an odyssey rather than a journey. A journey, I would suggest, is any movement from one point to another. Sure, it can be meaningful, but it doesn't necessarily imply struggle, transformation, or the deep identity skirmish. For me, an odyssey is a long wandering or voyage, usually marked by many changes of fortune, an intellectual or spiritual wandering or quest, or the deeper meaning of the Odyssey, which follows the heroic king of Ithaca, Odysseus, often known by the Latin variant Ulysses, and his homecoming journey after the 10-year-long Trojan War. At its core, the Odyssey is a tale of homecoming. Odyssey's journey to Ithaca was not just a physical one, but also emotional and spiritual. That resonates. As he encounters the various challenges, he grappled with his identity, both as a warrior and as a human. That rang. An Odyssey is a story filled with trials, endurance, and resilience. That echoed. Personally, using this word acknowledges that what I have been navigating these past years were not just life events, but rather events that required strength and resilience that I never imagined I would need. From the outside, my adoption would be described as being a good one. A stable home, education. I went on and had a great nursing career in nursing and healthcare. I've travelled, tick, tick, tick. But beneath that, there was always something unspoken. When I was about 3 years old, my brother and I, we were sat down one evening and told that we were adopted. I can still picture myself sitting on my mother's knee as she held me tight, and my brother was sat on my dad's knee when they broke the news to us. Recalling this still sends a slight shiver throughout my body. The adoption rhetoric of the 1960s subsequently followed. Your mothers couldn't keep you. You both have different mothers. Your mothers loved you so much that they gave you away. You were chosen. You are so special. You can never find your real mother and father. It's not allowed. But you can never ever tell anyone that you are adopted. It's our secret. And we love you just as much as if you were our own. You belong to us. I recall how frightened and confused I became. My world in that instant was shattered. What was true was not true. And so began a long life habit of scanning faces of women that had dark brown eyes and brown hair. Could she be my mother? I went on and lived my life, and like a good girl, I never told a soul that I was adopted until I was in my late 20s. Eventually, I began to divulge my secret to a handful of close friends, and only after I'd had consumed copious amounts of white wine. For most of my life, the idea of searching felt impossible. In New South Wales, adoption records were not opened until 1991, and even after the records opened, the emotional barriers remained just as strong for me. The fear, the secrecy, the not knowing what I might find, and the thought of being rejected was enough to keep that door firmly shut. 13 years ago, I do recall seeing Gillard's national apology on the evening news. I watched intently and felt that ache in the pit of my stomach, but like always, I left it there, buried, as usual. Again, it was just too emotionally painful and confronting for me to even think about searching for my birth parents. Besides, I already have a mother and father. What would I be looking for? My life ticked along relatively smoothly until everything changed on the evening of the 14th of July 2016. I was at that time heading towards my mid-50s. My father had passed away 8 months previously, and my mum had not long gone into a nursing home after breaking both hips. My husband was working away, and it was a usual drive home from work on a cold, dark, rainy Sydney winter's night. I pulled up, grabbed the mail out of the box and ran inside. I threw the mail onto the kitchen bench, poured myself my usual glass of vino, picked up the first envelope off the bench, and I noticed the colourful jigsaw logo on the top left, and I instantly knew. I just knew. How did I know what this meant? I can't answer that. I just knew. My heart was racing. I had never had any prior interaction with Jigsaw Queensland, but I just knew something big was inside that envelope. And I knew from this point in time that my life was never going to be the same, and I hadn't even opened the envelope. From this exact moment, my life split into two. That is, before the letter and after the letter. I opened the letter and read it, and it informed me that a family member was searching for me. I clearly recall a strange sensation engulfing my entire body. The door that had been closed for my entire life had suddenly become ajar. Like all adoptees, I had always lived with questions. Some of them were quiet and sat in the background, others were louder. Questions about identity, belonging, and where did I really come from? The louder questions I would always bury quick smart. It was just all too painful to confront. Besides, I was living a busy life. Reading that letter was both exhilarating and terrifying. In an instant, it validated something deep inside me that I had often thought about, but always quickly dismissed, that there was someone out there who knew about me and my beginnings. 2 days later, after reading the letter, my adoptive mother died unexpectedly. What a week. Little did I know from that letter and my initial phone call with Jigsaw, I was embarking on something that was to have a profound effect on my life into the future. I had what you would call a successful union with my birth mother for the first few years. We got to know one another very quickly, and in hindsight, possibly it was all too fast. I have no regrets. I really enjoyed her company, and I felt so grateful that I got to learn about her relationship with my birth father. Subsequently, there were trips to Brisbane, Sydney, Thailand, Tassie, shows, eating, drinking. We lived the high life. It was almost intoxicating, but underneath, I always felt an uneasy feeling that something just didn't feel right. On the surface, everything was grand, but I chose to ignore my intuition. Meeting my new half-siblings, their families and other relatives who were all unaware of my existence was extremely daunting, and it was here that over time that I began to slowly unravel. I was literally on cloud nine for a good while, and I chose to ignore the red flags that were warning me that I was treading on an emotional, unsafe ground. Although it came to light fairly quickly that others were not as excited about our reunion, Over time, the doubt and questions about myself began to plague me. It began to eat away at me that I wasn't wanted. I was not a part of the family. Logically, I understood that I didn't have the shared experience of growing up with them, but something was eating away at me. I was beginning to live the biggest fear that I had ever had, which was to be rejected again. My birth mother couldn't comprehend how I felt, and obviously her loyalties lay with her family. I was her family, but not their family. All these feelings began to surface, where I just began to question my worth and my existence. This toppled over into my work, where I began to second-guess myself. I had developed severe anxiety and depression, something like I had never experienced ever before, and it was scary. At the time, I didn't have the tools that could help me through this dark time. I began to drink after work to deaden my feelings, and subsequently, I spiraled deeper into depression. I began to question everything about myself. It was around this time that I decided to search for my birth father and find out from him his side of the story. I turned to Jigsaw, just like my birth mother had, and with a short time they had located and written to him on my behalf. He responded positively, and we met up within a week. It was a time of ups and downs, although I felt so alone with my feelings and where I was going in my life. I felt a sense of desperation as I just couldn't unravel all of my feelings. I was just so down on myself. I began to read adoption literature, something that I could never do in the past, because that would mean I had to acknowledge that I was adopted. I found some podcasts that would sit up, and I would sit up in bed for hours digesting them. It wasn't until I found the Adopt Perspective podcast hosted by Joe that something clicked. I devoured them. Episode by episode, I began to realise that my experience was not unique, and what I was feeling several years post-reunion was not uncommon. I was not alone. There are others out there with a similar story and who are struggling. Early in 2025, through the Adopt Perspective podcast, I learned that Jigsaw Queensland were partnering with the Access Psychology Clinic and offering an 8-week self-compassion group, which was adoption-focused. I was accepted into the program, and at the same time I was so scared about attending, as I had never really met other adoptees, let alone say the words, "I am adopted," in public. Attending these sessions were pivotal, and is where Jigsaw Queensland became such an important part of my healing journey. The self-compassion workshops were a turning point for my healing. Instead of asking what's wrong with me, I began to ask what happened to me. I have also softened toward that little baby who cried for the first 11 months of her life. I have not dismissed her as it was inferred that I was a nuisance. I was crying for a very valid reason. For much of my life, I had carried feelings of not quite belonging without fully understanding why. In the weekly group sessions, I began to see that many adoptees carry similar feelings, what is now commonly referred to as the primal wound, the deep loss that occurs when a child is separated from their biological mother. Hearing others gave language to the emotions I had struggled to name. I learnt so much from the other ladies in the group as the weeks progressed. For the first time in my life, I felt validated that everything I had ever questioned or felt about adoption was true. It was all about learning how to be kinder to myself. That's why the 8-week self-compassion course was so transformative for me. It helped me realise that the emotions I carried were not signs of weakness, they were natural responses to a complex beginning. I then went on to attend the Jigsaw bi-monthly Adopt EP group, support groups, and some simply social events, which further cemented that the feelings I had carried for so many years were not mine alone. There is something profoundly healing about being in a room where you don't have to explain the inexplicable. Everyone just simply understands. Most of all, I do not have to perform to make genuine connections. Another important my healing journey was participating in an 8-week online attachment style workshop. And through these conversations, I began to understand how early separation can shape the way we connect with others later in life, how it can influence our fears, our relationships, and our sense of safety in the world. For me, this knowledge was incredibly freeing. Instead of seeing my patterns as personal failings, I began to understand them as adaptations, the way that my younger self had learned to survive and navigate this world. From my abandonment identity, I am learning to choose myself, not sit back and wait to be chosen. I am no longer defining myself by who left, but rather I am the one that stays. I have also learned about stored trauma and moving towards the processing of this trauma. Through other Jigsaw-sponsored sessions, I have undertaken EFT tapping sessions whereby I can use this tool as a way to calm my nervous system at any time. Art therapy sessions were another way where we were able to give creative expression to things that words cannot hold. I have experienced EMDR with a psychologist, which assists in helping the brain reprocess painful memories so they no longer feel present. Healing, I have learned, is not about erasing the past. It is about integrating it. It is about acknowledging the loss, the questions, and the complexity of adoption, while also recognising the strength it takes to navigate its complexities. I was fortunate to be raised by adoptive parents who loved me and gave me many opportunities in life. And yet, like many adoptees, there was still a huge part of my story that remained unknown. Through the support of Jigsaw and through the courage of others willing to share their stories, I have been able to explore this once hidden part of myself with honesty and compassion. Healing does not mean that everything has been resolved, although it does mean that I now stand in a different relationship with my past. I understand myself more deeply. I have greater self-compassion for the child I once was, and I feel a stronger sense of belonging, not because all the questions are answered, but because I have found a community that understands this odyssey. To everyone at Jigsaw Queensland, past and present, support workers, my fellow adoptees, birth parents, adoptive parents, who all share their stories with such courage, I thank you. Your work and time creates the spaces where healing becomes possible. And to anyone who may be at the beginning of their own odyssey, I want to say this: you are not alone. Your story matters and healing is possible. And I dedicate this to my birth mother and my adoptive mother. Thank you.
Thank you to Liz. It reminds me of something I've heard a lot and I've experienced in my own life, is that sometimes as adopted people we go looking for connection when we meet our biological parents, and sometimes we find it and sometimes we don't. But when we come together as a community and connect with each other, that's sometimes where the biggest healing comes, I think. So thank you so much, Liz, for speaking.
Thank you.
I now welcome Janet Palmer to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. It feels very good to be part of the 13th anniversary of the National Policy for Forced Adoptions in 2013. Thank you, Julia Gillard. My name is Janet and I'm also a mother. I have been an attendee at Jigsaw's Queensland meetings for many years and am most grateful for the ongoing support given to me by Jigsaw. When I was asked to write some words about what healing meant to me, I checked the dictionary to confirm the meaning of healing and discovered this: healing is not linear, often slow process of restoring wholeness to the body, mind and spirit following injury, trauma or emotional pain. It is not about forgetting or erasing the past, but learning to live with, process and integrate experiences so that they no longer control daily life. September 11, 2001 was the day that changed the world forever, when the Twin Towers in New York were destroyed and many lives were lost. Ironically, it was also the 11th of September that changed my life forever,
the date of my son's birth, in 1966, some 35 years earlier. With the help of Jigsaw Queensland, I began my search for my son in April 2000. At the time, I doubted I had the emotional strength to face what was to be a journey into the unknown. There were many times I questioned whether it would be better to leave the past alone. I did not know what to expect. I didn't even know if he was alive. And so I crafted my first contact letter with the help of Jigsaw, in which I referred to myself as a relative, as I could not assume that he knew he was adopted. He replied immediately, "I think he'd been waiting." My life then and still is a roller coaster of emotions in respect to my son. The first serious issue I had to face at the beginning of my search was when I received my son's identifying paperwork from the Queensland Government, and I discovered he had remained in the hospital nursery for 6 weeks until he was taken home by his adoptive parents. I was deeply upset. I felt such guilt knowing he probably was left to cry in his crib for days on end. It was a time when we unmarried mothers were treated as social outcasts, and I'm sure this lack of compassion extended to our babies in the nurseries. During my search, my focus was entirely on my son, to treat him gently and to have no expectations, and to let him do the talking. I also read Nancy Verrier's The Primal Wound, Understanding the Adopted Child, hoping to gain greater insight into the adopted baby's emotional life and also of the adoptive parent's role. The following quote was confronting to read, but also helpful. A central theme is the assertion that all adoptees, even those adopted at birth, will retain memories of the separation from their birth mothers, and that regardless of the way the adoption is presented and handled by adoptive parents, these memories will have profound effects on the emotional and psychological well-being of the child and adult adoptee. My reunion with my son has been positive, and thankfully I have been welcomed by his immediate and extended families. Initially, I thought there might be lots of questions by family members. However, there has just been a quiet understanding by all. But nothing is perfect. Open, good communication is the way to success in all relationships, and of paramount importance in a situation such as this. Even now, it is often very difficult. Nothing can take away the anguish of relinquishing a child, no matter the circumstances. I have been very fortunate to have received good professional help when needed. My long-term partner has been my rock and encouraged me to carry on when I felt it was just too damn hard and I was full of doubt and wondering if my search was the best thing for all involved. Falling pregnant as an unmarried teenager in the 60s resulted in one of three things: a shotgun wedding, I was not allowed to marry my boyfriend, an illegal termination, or being sent away for 6 months to work in a Magdalene laundry. Yes, there were several in Australia. Oh, the shame of it all. Instead, I spent 6 months working as a housekeeper for a family in a town in rural Queensland, which was very isolating in a social sense. Social isolation, insensitive treatment in the hospital, and lack of support by family members all contributed to a massive burden of guilt, which still plagues me today, if I allow it. I was a victim of a time when secrets were kept and some things were never talked about. There was always that elephant in the room. That was then, this is now. Most days I feel reasonably okay with my happy meter sitting at about 80%. I would like to finish with some words written by Helena Blavatsky, the gifted Russian writer who had great impact on the thought of the Western world in the 19th century. The following passage is taken from The Voice of the Silence. Let thy soul lend its ear to every cry of pain, like as the lotus bears its heart to drink the morning sun. Let not the fierce sun dry one tear of pain before thyself hast wiped it from the sufferer's eye. But let each burning human tear drop on thy heart and there remain, nor never brush it off until the pain that caused it is removed. 'Tis from the bud of renunciation of the self that springeth the sweet fruit of final liberation. In conclusion, healing for me is the therapeutic effect of expressing my thoughts and feelings with the understanding that time does not heal all wounds. It only teaches us how to carry them. I hope one day to find my sweet spot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janet. And I know, you've got a beautiful way with words, and I know writing has been a big part of your healing as well, and getting your story out through written expression, which art is an incredible way for people to explore what's going on and to heal. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'd now like to welcome Victoria Bansi to the stage.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak at today's event. 13 years ago today, I was sitting in my lounge room holding my then 7-month-old baby, watching Julia Gillard deliver the national apology for forced adoptions. I would like to say that I had some sort of foresight on how the baby in my arms, the son I have that looks like me, always a big thing for adopted people, how much he would factor into my healing. But like so many things on a journey, you must go through it before you realise how far you've come. I was born in 1974 at Boothville Hospital in Windsor, which, now a private home, is located not far from here. My birth mother was a 16-year-old schoolgirl who I can only imagine must have been terrified. I'm thankful and proud that she broke the no photo rule at the hospital, and so I have a precious reminder of the short time we spent together after my birth, which many adopted people do not. Adopted people talk about coming out of the fog for the moment when they realise that maybe adoption isn't what society thinks and tells us. For adopted people, adoption is the many thoughts that you learn to keep to yourself from a young age, to ensure the comfort of friends and family. That is, until you build up the courage to go to your first adoptee-only meeting at Jigsaw, and you can connect with other adopted people, and they say out loud the thoughts that previously only existed in your brain. I first engaged with Jigsaw in the mid-1990s when I started my search for my birth parents. At the time, it was run by a volunteer staff of mostly birth mothers who offered kindness and advice. Following their counsel, I found my birth mother who had given birth to another daughter a year after me, who was also adopted to a separate family. My birth mother later married and had 3 daughters, none of whom were aware of my existence until just this past year. My birth mother and I first met in a Pizza Hut car park, as that was the only place that I knew in her country town in those pre-GPS days. When I met her there was no recognition. I will admit I was disappointed that I didn't look anything like her. All these years of waiting, and we looked nothing alike. We went back to her home and she showed me through a photo album as I frantically tried to think of the polite way to ask, who is my father? She turned a page in the photo album and there it was, someone that I looked like. Through her, I had my birth father's name and used Jigsaw as an intermediary to contact him. When we first met, he looked at me and joked, "I don't think we'll be needing that DNA test." I looked like someone. He had a 3-year-old daughter, and he introduced me to her as her sister, a title that I'm lucky enough to keep with her to this day. Whilst adoption was always on my mind, life moves on, and in the years since that initial reunion in the 1990s, I experienced secondary rejection from my birth mother. I travelled and lived overseas, married, finished a degree, started a career, and had 2 children. Adoption first really came back to the forefront when I was pregnant with my first child. Attending antenatal classes and being told about the importance of things like skin-to-skin contact after birth, breastfeeding, and looking into your baby's eyes and bonding with them. All things that I realised that I would not have had as an adopted baby. After my oldest son's birth, he had to stay in the NICU while I was taken back to my room. I had my first and only panic attack in my life that day. The feeling of being separated from my baby was something that I hope I never feel again. Parenting is a learning journey, but my journey made me reconsider my own childhood. Giving my children grace, as well as relating to them in a way that was completely new because of the insecurities and lack of self-esteem that I felt growing up adopted. Over the last couple of years, as more opportunities for engagement in the adoptee community have happened, I have taken the chance to attend courses on topics such as attachment styles for adopted people, self-compassion for adopted people. They have helped immensely, as I reckon with the realisation that I feel has come with age and knowledge. I will always be adopted. It wasn't a one-time event when I was a baby, and no matter what my adoptive family do, what steps I take, the new members of my birth family that I meet, I will always be adopted, and that is not going to change. It is learning to live with this and accepting it that has helped me realise what healing means to me. So for me, it's being there for my children so that my trauma ends with me, accepting the things that I can't change and working on the things that I can. It means getting involved to ensure that the forced adoption era doesn't happen again. I'm a big believer in action being the cure to despair. It's reading the statistics and seeing the alarming increase of adopted people who attempt suicide compared to their non-adopted peers. It also means educating those around me with what adoption really means. It's not a cute Instagram video with a small child who can't possibly consent to their adoption or to having their story shared on the internet forever. It's also not about the friend who is adopted who tells you, "Oh, being adopted doesn't make any difference to me." Because sometimes adopted people know that they'll be telling us a different story when they come to their next peer support group because we're a safe space for them. Adoption is a severance of my life at the start that will impact me until the end. It's not my only identity, but it is a major part of who I am. And it always will be, and that's okay.
I'm always struck by just the lifelong journey that adoption is. It just doesn't stop adopting. I guess is kind of the word I'm looking for. How sometimes once we've had kids, maybe we're kind of okay in the land of denial for a long time. Maybe we have kids and that's where it rears up, or a death of an adoptive parent or some other major life event. But thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Victoria.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I'd now like to welcome Phil Kenwood.
Well, good morning, folks. It's really great to be here. I feel very honoured to be here to speak this morning. My name's Phil, and I'm semi-retired. I'm a former engineering draftsman in the mining industry, a traveller of the world, a motorcycle rider and former racer. I also built and raced catamarans competitively. Along with my father and my brother, we rebuilt and raced a vintage open-wheeled racing car. I currently play the guitar in a band, and I'm a keen photographer as well. I also took up yoga about 15 years ago, and I'm now a yoga teacher. Having said all of that, it sounds like I've had a life well lived, but most of the things that I did in the past were a distraction to keep my mind off the pain. It was all about keeping my mind busy and off topic. I am a father to 4 children, the first of which was a daughter who was given up in the forced adoption era in 1970. I also have 5 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. Today, though, I'm here to share my story on healing, what it is and what it does and what it means to me. Why do we need it? And the old cliche is, what's it going to do for me? Some might say that they don't need healing as such, they just want resolution. For me, we need to heal because it can eat us up if we don't heal. To carry the weight of living in constant trauma can be damaging for our well-being and our health and our state of mind. Being a yoga teacher for many years, I've seen lots of people in my classes suffering the effects of a tight body, aches and pains with physical problems due to stress, or having physical issues and psychological issues with a mind tangled up in grief. For me, it sticks out like a sore thumb, but the people dealing with it may not realise it at all. For some context, I was a very angry young man at 17 when my partner gave up our daughter to a broken forced adoption system, which I had no part in. I was not required in any way. No one ever asked me if I'd like to sign an adoption order to give my child up. I was therefore invisible as the child's father. I was persona non grata in this situation, and my anger issues had nowhere to rest, and my anxiety grew larger out of this. My mother said after the child's birth and subsequent adoption, "Oh, you'll get over it, just get on with your life." I never did ever get over it, and I still don't think I am today. I hung on to the remorse, the grief and the separation for years. I held on to that heartache even after my partner and I were married. We travelled the world for 5 years running away from that anguish. 21 years later, we met our daughter at our reunion, and I thought that would be the magic pill, the fix-all. But I didn't realise that the reunion was just the beginning of the journey. There was so much more to come. I'm in my 70s now, and it's only been in the last 10 to 15 years that I knew I actually needed to heal from past traumas. From my personal experience, healing is not linear. It can be up and down all over the place, just like life is sometimes. Healing can also come in small packages when we least expect it and from corners we may not have thought possible. It just depends on how open we are to it. In some cases, it can be people who come to us with a drop of wisdom to impart. Other times, a moment of clarity in nature and the knowledge that all is not bad in the world. It's all about finding our own way. For me, journaling has been one great outlet. Writing stuff down just seems to get it out and give it a place to rest. I've also written a book on the subject of a father's perspective on adoption, especially forced adoption, which is the story that's not often heard. That process brought up some real and raw emotions from deep and dark places in my memory while it was being written, which meant I basically relived and revisited the past. My book is called Our Separated Lives for a reason. The process of writing the book was very cathartic though. It got it off my chest and onto paper. Rejoining Jigsaw a couple of years ago and becoming involved in this wonderful organisation has been most helpful and given me a much greater understanding of how the adopted person might think and feel. I feel like I have actually found my tribe in this organisation, and it's brought me a level of calm I had not known before. Healing for me means that I have a degree of peace in my life now rather than living in conflict. It also means that I can show others love, compassion and empathy. Yoga has been a huge influence on my life. I have practiced self-care and self-awareness for the past 15 years before becoming a yoga teacher to share my experience with others. I mindfully ask myself why I might be thinking a certain way, or why am I feeling something not quite right in my body? What's the root cause? Can I deal with this or just sit with it? I definitely do not just react to things or situations that come up anymore. Yoga, and in particular the meditation component of this practice, can be a great way of working things out in your body and mind. After all, they are interconnected. I also have a philosophy for myself that if we can't look after ourselves and our own well-being, then how can we possibly look after anyone else? I've learnt many lessons along the way, mostly that I am responsible for my own happiness. No one else can make me happy. That's something that I'm in charge of. Knowing that not every day is going to be good or even perfect, there will be good and there will be bad days. I just need to realise that today, if it's not good, then tomorrow will always be better. It's a case of hanging in there. Everything will change. It always does. Life is full of lessons. Sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we'll trip up. We may say and do the wrong things. It's hard to lead a perfect life, especially in the adoption sphere in which we operate. We're all just trying to do our best. I wish you well, and thank you for listening. Thanks, Joe. Thank you.
And one of the magical things is that Phil now regularly facilitates the mixed support group alongside me, and so Father's Voice isn't one that we often have in the adoption space to hear from, and it's been incredibly healing for adopted people and mothers who come to that group to have that voice. So thank you so much, Phil.
Thank you.
I'd like to invite Philippa Bell.
Good morning, everyone. It is such an honour to be here with you all. Thanks, Joe. Today, I want to talk about love, healing, and superheroes. But to understand what those have to do with each other, I need you to picture a baby. A baby who has spent 9 months cocooned in warmth, lulled by the sound of her mother's heartbeat, her mother's voice, the only voice she has ever known. Science tells us a baby recognises their mother from the womb, and that skin-to-skin contact in those first moments of life is not just comforting, it is vital. It shapes our nervous system. A baby is biologically wired to regulate through their mother's heartbeat, her voice, her smell, her eyes, her touch. Every sense reaching for the one person she already knows. It tells that baby, you are safe, you are loved, you belong. Now picture that same baby, ready to meet her mother, ready to be held, nurtured, loved. And instead, she is taken away, placed in a Perspex hospital cot, clinical white walls, fluorescent lights, nurses on rotation, fed, changed, repeat, for 6 weeks, alone. No mother, no father, no family, no skin, no love. That baby was me. Here is the thing about human beings, even the tiniest ones. We are wired to survive. And so that little baby, me, did something remarkable. Something I didn't even know I had done until just recently. She built a superhero. Not the kind you see in the movies, but the kind the human nervous system creates when it needs to survive. I call mine Protector. Now I know what you're picturing, a cape, a mask, some kind of heroic human form. Protector is none of those things. Picture instead a force field, a thick, invisible wall between me and the outside world, one that numbs everything coming in, pain, stress, fear, and yes, love. Protector came into existence in that hospital cot because when you are a newborn baby and your mother, your entire world, is suddenly gone, your nervous system goes into terror. And the only way to survive that terror is to shut it down. So, Protector did. And Protector has been doing it ever since. Fast forward, I am 5 years old. My parents sat me down to tell me I'm adopted and that my parents loved me, but they couldn't keep me. Now, I don't know if you remember being 5, but for me, the concept of adoption is not something my 5-year-old brain could hold. I shut down, and without knowing it, I filed love under a new category: loss, betrayal, unsafe. There was no counselling, no support. We didn't really talk about it again. Society's message was simple: be grateful, you were given a better life. So, I got on with it, and Protector got stronger. I became what a lot of adoptees become: the good adoptee, the people pleaser, the chameleon, masking, adapting, and transforming to suit any situation. I became an expert at blending into my environment, changing colour to fit in, just to belong, because I had no real sense of self or identity. I put on this chameleon suit and I hid within it, with my superhero, Protector, on guard. I had grown up in a family where that was my life: fit in and adapt to this family of strangers. Someone once said adoption is like being a ladybug in a family of giraffes. You just don't fit. As an adult, Protector shaped my life. My force field grew stronger. Protector had one rule: do not let love in. Love means getting hurt. And Protector was not going to let that happen. Not again, not ever. The cost? I was surviving, but I was not living. Everyone around me got Protector: guarded, clinical, protected. I was always on high alert of rejection, betrayal, not feeling worthy of love. Protector always told me, love hurts, remember, it's just not safe. Research has shown that trauma convinces you that shutting down is safer, but the cost is high. You protect yourself from more pain, but you also block joy, trust, and love. You're left surviving instead of actually living the life you deserve. It wasn't until a few years ago that everything began to shift when I connected with Jigsaw. Many of us here today know that moment. That moment when you stop believing adoption hasn't affected you and start seeing how profoundly it shaped everything: your identity, your relationships, your entire understanding of love. This was when my healing began. Jigsaw gave me peer support, workshops, retreats, and a community that truly understood. For the first time, I wasn't alone in this. And from there began my personal quest to find the therapy and the information that really understood adoption trauma. What I discovered was transformational. And then last year, in therapy, something happened. With a deeper understanding of Protector, I was asked to go back to that baby in the hospital cot. But Protector was still there, strong, watchful. Nothing was getting through. So we had to do something different. We had to show Protector that I was safe and that it could step back. And that's when I was guided through a visualization where I created Rain. Meet my new superhero, Rainbow. Rain is a feminine superhero. She is built not from protection or fear, but from love. She is the nurturing, warm side that Protector had been keeping quiet for decades. Yes, she has a cape, a fabulous rainbow cape. She does have a human heroic form, exactly like your mind's eye would picture a superhero. In this therapy session, Protector and Rain met me as the baby, that tiny baby in the hospital cot. And I understood for the first time why Protector had come. Not to hurt me, to save me. Protector had been doing its job, faithfully, relentlessly, for my entire life. Just keeping me safe, alive, protecting me because no one else was going to. In that vision, Rain walked in and she picked up the baby. She held her. She hugged her. She didn't just keep her alive, she loved her like a mother loves. My new superhero. My whole body changed in that moment. A warmth spread through me, a tingling, a release of something I had been holding for 50 years. Because I understood for the first 6 weeks of life, love was absent. All I ever experienced was the nurses in that hospital. Clinical, efficient, keeping me alive. And so that is who I became. I stepped into the world without knowing what love felt like. Just Protector there to keep me safe and alive. Rain showed me something different. She showed me that I am worthy of love, that I always was, that the baby in that cot deserved to be held, loved, and it was never, ever her fault that she wasn't. Protector kept me alive. Rain taught me how to love and to let love in. Healing for me is learning that Protector and Rain do not have to compete. They can walk alongside each other. They are both my superheroes. Protector protects me, Rain loves me. I want to take you back to that baby, that little baby in the Perspex cot. She did not know she was building a superhero. She only knew she needed to survive. And she did, in the most extraordinary way. She created her own protection when the world didn't. I know that many of you here in this room today carry your own version of that story, your own Protector, your own force field, built in a moment of pain that was never yours to carry. So, I want you to hear this. Whatever shield or force field you built, it worked. You are here. But you are also allowed to put it down now. Give yourself permission to let love in. And above all, fall in love with yourself, just as I am. Because you are worthy of love. You always were. Thank you.
I don't know, is everyone else okay? I know, I've got some here. Philippa, no notes. That was amazing. Thank you. You are very loved by us.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Jo.
So as we come to the end of these reflections, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the extraordinary courage and generosity of each of our speakers today. To stand in front of a room like this and share such deeply personal experiences of loss, identity, of healing is no small thing. It's an act of trust, and it was a gift to us all. What you have offered today is more than storytelling. It is peer support in its most powerful form. Through your words, we are reminded that we are not alone, that the thoughts and feelings that we may have carried in isolation are in fact shared. And in hearing one another, we begin to understand what healing can look like in all its different forms, and that gives us hope. When stories are spoken in safe spaces like this, they do something more. They don't just connect us, they can begin to shift systems. And that is the power of what you shared today. So to each of you, thank you. We honour your stories and we carry them with us. I'd also like to extend my personal thank you to Jigsaw Queensland CEO Helen Angela Taylor, who was responsible for most of the event organisation today. There's lots of people behind the scenes, but it always ends up falling on someone's shoulders, and I'm glad it wasn't mine, and it was yours. Yeah, she works very hard to make sure it was seamless, and she already had a pretty full plate, let me tell you, so thank you. And thank you for coming in person today and for joining us via the webcast today as well. The presentation will be available shortly after we end today's event, and you'll be able to watch it on demand by clicking on the same link that brought you to today's event. Today's function will close and we have to vacate the room by 12:30 on the dot because they have another event coming in. So we now invite you to join us for morning tea and to feel free to enjoy the space outside as well. It's absolutely beautiful out there. And we'll be grabbing some of our special guests before they leave and stakeholders as well for photos. So if you could just linger nearby, we've got a prepared photo list, I think. So we'll quickly get those out of the way so we can enjoy the tea as well. But thank you, everyone.